Because the CEOs were very clear about the fact that I think most CEOs aren't necessarily as carefully crafted when they arrive in the role.
It is with great pleasure and excitement I'm going to introduce you, Michael Smets, who is going to give us a speech about some of his recent work, the CEO report that has been only probably introduced at the latest World Economic Forum in Davos in January. So this is actually the first time since that time this is presented to a broader audience. Michael is an associate professor at Said Business School, and you're running tailor-suited, also top management programs, working with, of course, leadership, motivation, complexity within organizations, and is, of course, very research-based as well. Michael focuses both on making some really rigorous theoretical work into his research, but also making sure that it has a lot of practical use to come out of whatever is being done. So Michael, I think it's time for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very, very kind words. Thank you to the CFL for inviting me. And there I clearly have to declare that obviously this is not my work. It's the work of a large research team. I've just been the lucky one who was picked to go to Copenhagen on a lovely spring day and enjoy the sunshine. And with that, I also have to extend very great thanks to you here and those watching from afar in Jutland that you've chosen to come here tonight. I am competing, I am aware, with a sunny evening outside. I've just been informed with the Champions League quarterfinal and the main course, so no pressure at all. As Belinda said, what I'm going to share with you is the CEO report, which was launched at the World Economic Forum in Davos through a panel hosted by Matthew Bishop of The Economist. It included Eileen Gordon of Ingredion, Arne Sorensen of Marriott, and Klaus Kleinfeld of Alcoa, to give you some sense of the caliber of people that we spoke to in this study. In total, we interviewed over 150 CEOs over the past year. Collectively, they have 880 years of experience as chief executives with an average tenure of 6.5 years. They collectively sign responsible for 5.8 million employees and $1.6 trillion of revenues. So it is a fairly illustrious sample that we interviewed. The report is distinctive in a number of dimensions. It's comprehensive in the way that it is not yet another one of those leadership surveys that focuses on the Western world. The sample, in a relatively balanced fashion, covers North America, Europe, but also the Middle East, Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin America, to give us a global impression of how CEOs lead and how CEOs attain the competence to lead in the current business environment. It also covers a very broad range of industries, from life sciences through industrial manufacturing to consumer goods and professional services. Also, in contrast to some other CEO surveys you may have seen out in the business press, it is a personal interview. So 95% of those conversations we conducted face-to-face in the room with the CEO, the others via video conference or telephone. So it's a very intimate setting in which we could explore and discuss the challenges of leadership today in a very intimate and open fashion, because we had this amount of time, but also, and especially, because we assured CEOs of their absolute anonymity. And it was quite remarkable to what extent CEOs were able and willing to open up and very candidly discuss the challenges and struggles that they go through in their day-to-day work, and that allowed us to discover concepts such as the power of doubt, which is the headline act, so to speak, for tonight, which I will get to in a moment. Here again is the question: how do you balance doubt, the humility and the hubris? And this finding balance issue was a very, very surprisingly strong trend in our data. In fact, we didn't ask any questions about balance, but over 2/3 of our CEOs brought up the issue of balance out of their own volition because it was clearly top of mind, top of agenda. Angelica Fuentes Telles, who you see here, is one of these people who are very keen on finding that balance in business. She is ranked number 5 on Forbes' list of most powerful business women in Latin America, and her corporate empire focuses on the empowerment of women and balancing the corporate activity with positive social impact. And there are many others who do similar things. Paul Polman at Unilever is very active. Richard Branson is doing a similar thing with the B team. And the important thing is that these people are not asking CEOs to turn their corporations into charities. But they say we have to find that bigger balance. We have to embrace this both and of offering broader purpose in our organizations. But importantly, it's not just about the what that CEOs have to balance in their decisions, what their organization is to be. They're equally attuned to the fact that they have to balance themselves. So 67% brought this up, and it's the ability to make those choices, balance stakeholders, balance long-term, short-term, balance priorities, that is critical. All kinds of things need to be balanced, and it almost looks like one of these acrobats spinning plates. Every decision you do in the organization is like one of these plates you try and keep up in the air. But obviously the critical thing we can take from that image is you have very little chance of balancing all those plates if you're not balanced yourself. So the balance of personal paradoxes, those personal both-ands that provide the footing for your decision-making, and balancing those organizational both-ands go hand in hand. You can see it in the way that balancing the organization is the what of your decision-making. Balancing yourself is finding balance in the how and the why. And the more credible, the more convincing the how of your decision-making is, the easier it is for you to generate buy-in into the what of your decisions. So some of the paradoxes and trade-offs that CEOs mentioned, and some of which we've already touched upon, is that humility versus hubris. Everything in the organization, in the corporate world, drives you towards this hubris. It's almost an insane amount of arrogance because everyone wants you to have this confidence. You have to very actively counteract that and find that balance point between humility and hubris, between optimism and pessimism, between authenticity and adaptability, but also between haste and hesitation. And what you do with that is you can find that organizational purpose as a particular balance point between long-term, short-term, profit, positive social impact, you name it. The critical thing is that we're not talking about the midpoint. We're not talking about a 50-50 equilibrium. That's actually never where the supporting pole is on a plate spinner either. But you have to very carefully choose how you want to balance those different missions and visions for your organizations. The problem is not when you prioritize one over the other. Problems arise when you over-prioritize one to the extent that you lose sight of your other commitments, because then, going back to our very, very first model, that is when a certain stakeholder group feels neglected, don't feel taken care of, and that's where problems start and a lot of corporate scandal actually looms. So the point is not finding the middle. The point is finding a balancing point that prioritizes one or the other without over-prioritizing. The interesting thing in which CEOs think about this is actually that a lot of traits that we used to take as almost given, they construct as some of those constructive balancing points as they're balancing the paradoxes of their work. So because all the decisions fall in the CEO, you have to have a clear vision, purpose, philosophy about where you're going, and you try and connect that to the organization. And you do that through these balancing points, one of which is doubt, which sits exactly in this constructive middle area between humility and hubris. And we've heard about that at length. The second one is realism. In the how of your decision-making, people don't want wildly optimistic, pie-in-the-sky estimates. Neither do they want a leader that is very pessimistic about what they want to do. They want a realistic expectation of what's going to happen, and that is actually a constructive balance point between that optimism and pessimism. Third, conviction, which, as we said, arises out of the doubt, working through the doubt to make more informed decisions that you can then communicate with greater confidence, greater conviction. Again, It's not about being humble and looking weak. It's not about being hubristic and overconfident, but finding that midpoint. And lastly, coming back to our theme of speed, is the sense of patience. The pacing of decision-making. You want to be neither hasty, nor do you want to be procrastinating. And a lot of the CEOs say, look, actually the risk of making a bad decision is equally big, whether I rush it or whether I delay it. The point is about finding the right patience, finding your personal balance, what you're comfortable with, because then you can drive those choices between right and right with greater conviction and generate greater buy-in. Which brings us to the concluding section about how do CEOs develop all those competencies? One of the key points of our study, and we see the picture of Anjar Jung, who was the former CEO of Avon, who is still to this day the longest tenured female CEO in the US, and she has always been very vocal about this need to constantly reinvent yourself. Says you have to be able to fire yourself on Friday evening and come back to the organization on Monday morning with a completely fresh pair of eyes. And if you can't do that, you won't have a very long tenure as a CEO. And that speaks to this sense of this continual learning and renewal, probably the second big surprise in our data. Because the CEOs were very clear about the fact that I think most CEOs aren't necessarily as carefully crafted when they arrive in the role as they might like to make out. In fact, I think there is probably more learning on the job that goes on than people get. So arriving in the CEO seat is by no means the end of the journey. It's just the end point of the first journey and the starting point of the second, because there are certain surprises given the structural uniqueness of the CEO. What especially surprises CEOs is what struck them, how much in the public eye CEOs are, and now courtesy of the media, you don't really ever quite get the preparation for being the external face of the business. Personal scrutiny, the breadth and depth of communication, board relationships, investor relationships, that engagement of multiple stakeholders. One CEO very clearly said, look, you can be third in line, you can be second in line, you see the CEO do it, you're still not doing it. So throughout your career, you've been driving a go-kart and suddenly you're being given a Formula One car. So because of the structural uniqueness of the CEO role, any preparation is almost by definition incomplete. There is learning that has to go in the job, and we model that at these interlocking S-curves, like product innovation in a way. So during your formative year, whether they are your early childhood, youth, or early career, you build up those capabilities and then you arrive in the seat, and actually what is surprising, what a lot of CEOs focus on, is the amount of unlearning that has to happen the moment you step into the role. You have to leave behind a lot of signature skills that used to make you who you are, that you're very, very good at, but you simply shouldn't be doing those things anymore. Remember what we said about ripple intelligence and the ability to remove yourself from the day-to-day running and take this kind of balcony-type view. So getting into the seat is actually the starting point for the second big S-curve, which is always driven by these small moments of reinvention. And typically, these are the moments of crisis, when CEOs successfully reinvent themselves, unlearn, pick up new skills. That's where they develop the ripple intelligence, uncover the power of doubt, develop their authenticity, and balance those paradoxes. So there is a very strong sense that when you arrive in the seat, you're not done. You're just done with the first stage, and that's where the second stage of the development really starts to grow, especially, as I said, in those areas: media relationships, personal scrutiny, board, investor, and broad and deep communication skills.